Good morning, everyone. My name is George Chirima from the Agricultural Research Council. I am from the unit called the Natural Resources and Engineering. I will share with you a little bit about the applications of the fourth industrial revolution in natural resources management, particularly with reference to agriculture. Because this is a quick presentation, my slide will have one line at the top, which pretty much summarizes what we'll be talking on that slide. Like on this slide that is showing now, the main message is linkages between agriculture and land degradation are much closer than acknowledged. Because usually people look at these things as separately, but you realize later on that most of the land degradation is related to farming or closer to farming, either by accelerating erosion, deforestation, and so forth. So these are very close indeed. The next slide is an important one. The message there is things are changing because from times immemorial, people have had this notion that the bigger the farms or the bigger the parcel, the better, including funding has been directed towards the bigger. But that notion is quickly changing because you would realize that the joblessness, poverty, and environmental degradation has continued to occur, and that millions of people actually live in poverty. So these are things that are changing that narrative. You can see that now, most of the millions of people, even in South Africa or in Africa, most of them rely on small-scale operations, be it farming or small businesses. So these are things that are now changing the game plan. So it means government needs to prioritize rural areas as well as urban areas when it comes to policy making in terms of development. It's also important to understand that if you want to diversify economies in the rural areas, it needs skills. So government needs to pay particular attention in upgrading the skills of rural people, particularly women and youth, in order to curb the movement to the cities or migration to other areas. Another important aspect, most of the land that is degraded is really in or surrounding poor communities because the options of survival are limited. So they tend to go and rely on natural resources. The next slide shows that the fourth industrial revolution is on in agriculture. The march is on. And it's important that if you don't narrow your description or your definition of fourth industrial revolution just to technology, because many people narrow that definition to technology or automation. There are drivers that are additional, that are pushing this process. The first one is a growing population. A growing population needs to be connected. There is increase in urbanization. Many people are moving because the urban areas are appealing. There is more opportunity there. Once they get there, they want to be connected. They want to relate to people, WhatsApp and everything. Climate change is another driver. People are suddenly realizing that the land resources that we have are finite. They cannot go on forever. So we need to adapt to climate change. We need to have solutions that adapt to climate change. So you have now smart technologies. People are struggling to say, how can I best make this piece of land work under these climate change issues? So there are also changes in biotechnology. Changes in services, for example. People are no longer giving a once-off product. They follow it up with services. All these issues are driving the fourth industrial revolution in agriculture, even though they sometimes fall behind. There's now linkages with farmers and the consumers themselves. Global changes in trade, all these push the fourth industrial revolution. So it's important to realize that the role of information has grown exponentially, both in scale and in scope. Our grandmothers, our old people in the rural areas, they can now access cell phones. They can now access some of these technologies. So all these are factors that enable realizing more profit, or that enable being efficient in whatever venture they are doing. So digitization is key, is on in agriculture, in the sense that it also improves working conditions. Now farmers have access to rainfall information. They can know when to plant. Previously, they would just rely on calendars, but now you can tell what is the weather in my area, and then you can plant and reduce losses. So the one aspect which is critical, or which is gaining traction in agriculture, is called precision agriculture. This is where by the next generation of farmers, particularly the younger ones, they also try to incorporate cell phones, try to incorporate webs issues on their activities. Some have managed. There's also issues like, for example, with government research councils, improving predictive analytics, which can anticipate losses or anticipate changes in climate, and that helps farmers as well. We now talk about smart irrigation, because water is a scarce skill in South Africa, so you cannot just broadcast or pour water everywhere. You have to manage in a very sustainable way. We also take all your chemicals and spray in the whole area, and hence causing pollution. You now have to look at which areas require which amount of what pesticides. So these are all important aspects that come from precision agriculture and enhance the fourth industrial revolution. So the important message on this slide is that the fourth industrial revolution and its solutions are accessible, and indeed they can be made accessible to farmers. The main challenge is the funding model. For farmers or poor farmers not to be left behind, there needs to be some funding model which funds for public goods. As I've said earlier on, that millions of people, approximately about 500 million people, risk being left behind because they don't have monies, they don't have enough resources. So it's important to come up with a funding model that would not leave anyone out. So this funding model has to consider what is there. It has to consider things like sensor applications, artificial intelligence, and precision monitoring. Taking cognizance, the farmers need support on each of these items that I have listed above. For example, artificial intelligence, machine learning. You would need government arms or government research council to do those processing of data in a smart way, and then let these systems be accessible to people. People already have cell phones. They can use GIS, positional systems, and so forth. So it's a question of blending all these technologies with a proper funding model that can ensure that nobody is left behind. Right. Previously, in most developing countries, that data has been a problem. Even now, we are still not there, where data is expensive. People want access to data. But the information or the good news is that data is increasingly becoming freely available. Some governments are now starting to fund the acquisition of data. And some organizations like NASA, the European Space Agency, are also making their data freely available. So with the bigger satellite data being freely available, what is left is ground truthing data, or data to validate or calibrate the satellites. This is where at least the government is required to come in and fund, or government and its partners to fund the acquisition of ground truthing data. That is a substantial reduction in cost of data. So once you can bridge that issue of data, then scientists can develop applications that are key in terms of monitoring resources in agriculture. Or, for example, this slide shows applications that are already happening in the country in terms of applications of drones to map the type of crops that can grow, applications of drone to spray. You are not spraying everywhere, you spray where it is required. You also have applications where you can map plants that are stressed, whether it's drought or they're stressed with pesticides. Like on the extreme right, you can see a map there which shows the red where plants are stressed either by nutrients or by diseases, and then farmers can target those areas and then bring in a variable spraying amount of, and then that saves money. We are now also moving into insurance index. How much is insured of these crops? And then this can be a good way to unlock money from banks, because then they can provide guarantees in small scale farming. This is another important application that we also carry in-house, which is measuring the land degradation. So now it's important you can measure these issues around the whole country, around the whole province. And the satellite imagery is good in the sense that you can go back in time and look at one particular area in the 1970, what the area looked like, what is it now, or what will it be in future. You can start talking about predictions and so forth, rate of change and so forth. If you look at the extreme right, there is a patch there about it. 30 years ago, there was a bush encroachment there of invasives. 30 years later, it's all closed up. So those things can now begin to happen because of issues of the fourth industrial revolution that can be applied in management of natural resources in agriculture. This is another typical example where pit fires happen. This destroys the ecological systems of the country. So you can use drone technology, you can use satellite technology and measure the amount of losses that are occurring in pits. And then it will predict, because the losses are generally because farmers abstract a lot of water from underground, and then the dry up the resources, and then fires come into play. This is another important aspect on erosion, where farmers can start to pick up erosion hotspots over time in a time series manner, and then picking up hotspots and picking up areas where vegetation has been removed, and trying to influence policy on how this can be reduced. This is another typical example. In now that drought, you can actually measure or predict drought. You can look at the progression. We use and if you move on the same area from 2009 to 2010, you can see that that same area is reducing in terms of the greenness, because or blueness, the greenness is important, shows the vegetation is performing well. But if you go to 2013, that area is dry already. So you can now make estimates of losses in terms of grazing capacity, foraging resources, and then advise their stock elsewhere, or they need to reduce their hedge. These are important issues that are to do with the fourth industrial revolution that can be made available to farmers. This slide is key in the sense that it brings another dimension, that land degradation. We previously looked at that the overharvesting of resources, either overgrazing, cutting down of trees, but there is another dimension, which is human migration. Human migration now can modify the impact on land. You can see those pictures where people have moved either from the rural areas and settle in areas that are not properly planned, and then the impact on the natural environment becomes bad. So it's important now to understand this, that migration is a way, in a strong way related to migration, that it has to land degradation. So it has to be properly put in policies. We know that good mining areas, good industrial areas will always be attractive for people to move. So in a way, these settlements, the government should be able to plan properly and or implement policies that can reduce the impact of degradation. All right, in closing, I have some insights that probably could go for the discussion later on. These are key insights that I have in my mind. The first one is, in previous transformation or in previous revolutions and previous changes, industrialization has been the main driver, but it is not occurring, or it is lagging behind in most of sub-Saharan Africa, particularly in the SADC region, if you want to call it. Most of the countries there, industrialization is lagging behind. And in coming decades, there will be more youth, and the population will need to find jobs. And because I said earlier on that most of our people are in the rural areas, so those people risk being left behind in this transformation or in access of these technologies if they are not properly, if we don't plan properly. Then there's also an issue about dietary shifts and climate change. These will also require exceptional developments of issues around the fourth industrial revolution. And one important aspect is agriculture per se, especially agro-industry in small scales. There is a beginning to shift of perception that actually these small scales, even though they are not appealing to funders, but over years, over millennia, they've been supporting people in terms of food security, in terms of livelihoods. They've been supporting them. So there's need to say, wait a minute, how can we improve, or how can we enhance these activities in the small scale operations? And of course, the bigger part is for everyone not to be left behind, to bring everyone in an inclusive manner. There is need to look at the funding model for public goods. Most of these small scale farmers do not have the luxury of investing in big data processing issues that are around the fourth industrial revolution. So there is need to look at the funding models where the government partners with the private sector to fund the public good, so that this can unlock and everybody is involved in the transformation. Thank you very much. Those are my few points.
So maybe we can go to the second speaker, who should be Dr. Pierneef.
Thank you, Doctor. Good morning to all. My name is Rian Pierneef from the Agricultural Research Council Biotechnology Platform, and I will be presenting omics applications in agriculture, the digitization of biology. So to start, let's first put agriculture in an Earth history perspective. The figure on the left illustrates Earth's milestones as a one-year calendar. Earth's calendar year plainly shows our age as a species relative to the much, much older life forms on Earth. And it helps us to see that our story is but a tiny part of the Earth's history. In this figure, Earth is born 1 second past midnight on the 1st of January. Around the 25th of February, we see life appearing. Now, this is followed by photosynthetic ability on the 28th of March. And during August and September, we see the introduction of multicellular organisms and sexual reproduction. Those weird and disgusting organisms, fungi, appear mid-November and is closely followed by fish, plants, and insects. In December, we see a boom in milestones with amphibians, reptiles, mammals, birds, and flowers emerging. On Christmas Day, we lose dinosaurs. Perhaps that was a Christmas present. Then we go on to the last day of the year. If the history of Earth is represented in a single year, Homo sapiens only joins the party at 24 minutes to midnight on the 31st of December. We've only been here for the last 24 minutes of an entire year. At about 1 minute to midnight, we get tired of going out to collect food and decide rather to bring the food to us. This is the start of agriculture. So if Earth's history was compacted into a single year, we've only been farming for 1 minute. Now, even more astounding is that during this last minute, we have seen the start of the fourth industrial revolution and the application of the associated technologies and advances in agriculture. Agriculture has come a very long way in a very short period of time. Now, digitization is defined as the process of converting information into digital or computer-readable format. Today, I'll be discussing some of the digitization initiatives we use in the agricultural value chain. Now, these can be summarized as omics applications, and in general aims to collectively characterize and quantify biological information. In essence, omics applications convert biological information into a computer-readable format. This slide details some of the omics applications we employ on a daily basis. Genomics is an interdisciplinary field which focuses on the structure, function, evolution, and editing of genomes. We obtain the genetic information of an organism by means of sequencing. In essence, we digitize all the genetic information of an organism. Transcriptomics is focused on an organism's transcriptome, and by means of sequencing, we digitize the biologically active or expressed portion of an organism's genome at a certain point in time. Microbiomics is a relatively recent omics application and aims to collectively characterize and quantify microbial communities. This application allows us to digitize environmental microbial communities as a whole without the need for isolation and cultivation of individual species. Phenomics is the systematic study of phenotypes or physical traits of an organism. Here we digitize the physical growth or change in the visual characteristics and traits of an organism over time. These omics applications can be used individually or collectively and are merely a portion of all the potential omics applications we use to digitize biology. Now, I'm a bit of a petrol head, and generally I think about things in relation to cars. Genomics would be like getting all the specs or info about your favorite car. What brand, variant, or model? What's the performance like? Kilowatt and fuel consumption on paper? Does it have aircon, leather seats, and a sunroof? In essence, obtaining all the information regarding the possible functionality of a vehicle. Transcriptomics would then be like taking this vehicle, for which you have gathered all the information, on the road and measuring the performance of the vehicle and individual components along the way. What's the fuel consumption, average speed, top speed, and distance traveled? How many times did you use the aircon, radio, or lights? Microbiomics will then be taking a census of all the other vehicles encountered along the way. How many? Which brand, color, or model? How fast were they driving, in which direction, and where are the traffic jams or congestions? Was there perhaps a Ferrari or Maserati in our environment? Phenomics is then similar to those wonderful speeding cameras and e-toll gantries we pass on our route. Whilst we're driving merrily along, a picture is taken to inform us how fast we were going and in which direction. Now, these pictures can further inform us with regards to our average speed between 2 points, where we were standing still, and when we were speeding. So to summarize, omics applications allow us to digitize biological information along the various routes we travel or farm. This information is critical in choosing the most appropriate farming and production strategy, which in turn leads to the optimization and precision in agriculture. Now, I work at the Agricultural Research Council Biotechnology Platform, where we incorporate a multitude of these omics strategies in the agricultural value chain. And this is what my office looks like. My colleagues will attest to the fact that you will seldomly find me in the field, farm, or sampling. I can be found behind a computer analyzing digitized biological data. I'm a bioinformatician, which simply means I work in the biology IT department. In this biology IT department, we convert biological information into a computer-readable format and analyze the output with state-of-the-art computational infrastructure. This type of environment is where a large portion of agriculture and the employees within the sector will find itself in the near future. At the ARC BTP, we generate this data by digitizing biology using various omics applications, and as such provide 4IR compatible solutions along the entire agricultural value chain. The success of these digitization initiatives is evident in both scientific knowledge generation and practical implementation in the agricultural value chain. We implement omics applications along the entire agricultural value chain, from farm to fork. Being in the midst of a global pandemic, we quickly forget about challenges and outbreaks affecting human health and the agricultural sector. Not long ago, we were faced with the listeriosis outbreak when polony tried to kill us all. This was the world's worst outbreak of listeriosis, and the ARC BTP was at the forefront providing genomic solutions to identify and track the deadly ST6 strain. We digitized a copious amount of listeria genomes and as such was able to assist government and other stakeholders in the monitoring of foodborne pathogens. We are actively involved as a service provider or collaborator on various transcriptomics projects where we digitize the expressed or active portions of a genome for organisms big and small. Now, this data is used in the cutting-edge research with which the output is critical to plant, animal, and human health. Recently, we employed Microbiomics to demonstrate the added benefit of irrigating pig pasture lands with wastewater. Irrigation with wastewater increased plant production and as such provided economic efficiency to farmers. Digitization of the microbiome was critical in understanding the underlying biological effect of irrigating with wastewater. The biotechnology platform currently houses possibly the most sophisticated phenomics technologies, both in field and in a controlled environment. Using these technologies, the growth and factors affecting growth of various commercial crops are currently being analyzed or digitized. These results will be crucial in choosing optimized production strategies and will provide stakeholders the relevant digital information to enhance production and profitability. The rapid evolution in agriculture requires contemporary applications. The fourth industrial revolution has clearly demonstrated the power of big data, and this holds true in the agricultural sector. We need to harness big data and employ 4IR strategies in the agricultural environment to ensure food safety for all. At the ARC BTP, we contribute to precision in agriculture by digitizing biology using omics applications. So in conclusion, get in the car with us and come take a drive to the digital biology age. Thank you.
So thank you, Dr. Rian Pianif. Thank you, Dr. Chirima, the first two speakers of this session. Quite interesting discussions. We've heard that data is there, it's freely available, it's accessible, And maybe Dr. Chirima, you might want to think to say, you know, what are the challenges, what are the limitations and the risks of us taking that data and using it for routine applications. And Dr. Pianif, I would also want you to think along, you know, what's stopping us now to fully digitalize biology. And whilst you're thinking on that, I would invite our next panelist. I was told that they will give their presentations at the same time. And this is Mario and Ms. Ford from the CSR. The floor is yours.
Thanks very much. We're going to co-present this, paper. Myself, Meryl Ford, and Dr. Isabel Mayer. We're both based at the CSIR, and we are going to be talking about using blockchain to connect small-scale farmers and processors to markets. We've initiated a project called ILIMA that will help us do that. So we'll cover a bit about what the 4R is, a bit about what blockchain is, why would we use blockchain in a supply chain, and then some examples of how it's used around the world, a bit more about the challenge and opportunity around small-scale farmers in South Africa. We'll talk a bit about the ILIMA platform, and then the approach we're taking with regard to ILIMA to make sure that we take an ecosystem approach, and it's not just one organization doing something. We need to do things collaboratively. So if we look at, you know, what is the 4R? I mean, there's a lot of talk about 4R this and 4R that, and many people actually just think of the 4R as a technology, you know, the way technology is rapidly changing. So we've all heard the definition that it's kind of a rapid change between physical, digital, and biological technologies. But the 4R is a lot more than that. The 4R is about how these rapid technological changes affect the way we do business. It affects the way we actually develop policy and regulation. So governance is affected in a dramatic way. It talks about, you know, how do these huge changes in the way we do things, how does it affect society? How is it going to affect skills and jobs? Are we ready as South Africa? Does everyone have access to technology in the way that will be needed in the future? And one of the most important things is, you know, with all of these changes and new technologies and new businesses, you know, how does this all affect the environment? How will it affect climate change? We need to be aware of all of these things when we start talking about the fourth industrial revolution. It's not only about the technology, but it's about the way we do things and the way these things are changing the way the world works. So if we look at the 4R in South Africa, these are the various industry sectors. If we look at agriculture and fishing as an industry sector, you know, the 4R applied to agriculture. So I guess it's, you know, you could call it agriculture 4.0 or smart agriculture or digital transformation in agriculture. Now, these are the kinds of things that you can do based on not only new technologies, but new ways of doing things and being. So we decided to focus on blockchain for supply chain management, tracking and provenance, visibility and traceability. And that's what our ILIMA project is all about. So I think it's also important to kind of talk about, you know, everyone talks about blockchain. There's a lot of confusion about what blockchain is. I mean, is blockchain Bitcoin? You know, yes and no. I mean, Bitcoin is just one application of the technology. Blockchain is basically a technology that you can think of as a kind of a database. What's important is that information can only be added to this database, and you can never remove information from the database. And what makes it unique and what makes it exciting technology is that a copy of this database is kept on hundreds of thousands of computers or nodes around the world. So you can imagine if you try and remove one record from this database, you'd have to remove it simultaneously from thousands of computers around the world. And that's what makes this such a unique technology. It's for the first time, it's a way to actually exchange value over the internet, so that record and that value cannot be replicated. If you can imagine, you can send an email to someone, you can send a file to someone, and that file, you still have a copy of that file, and the other person has a copy of that file. With blockchain, there's only one version of that file. So why should we use it in supply chain? There are multiple reasons. I mean, the first is, an important thing is immutability. So if you want to keep a record of something and you don't want anyone to change it, then you keep a record on the blockchain, and that data is stored forever, literally, and it cannot be altered. It enables disintermediation, for example. So, instead of using intermediaries, you can actually, and unnecessary often intermediaries, you can actually depend on the technology itself to be the intermediary. It enables proof of ownership. It keeps a record of everything that's happening. It uses some smart technology, looking at all kinds of mathematical models, so that you can prove that you own particular data, and you can prove where that data has been sent from one person to the next, or from one organization to the next. I'm not going to go into too many details, but I think this whole concept of a trustless environment is also very important. You need to be able to trust that the data you are receiving is the actual data that was sent. So you need to have some kind of a platform that is a trust platform, so that anything built on top of this trust platform can be trusted. And that's the value that blockchain adds within the fourth industrial revolution. So blockchain and supply management around the world. This is one of the big use cases at the moment around the world. And it's not something that's being tested. It's something that is actually actively being used. There are very large organizations that are using blockchain to store and enable traceability and enable various supply chain solutions. So IBM has got two major initiatives. The first is the Trade Lens solution. It's a global supply chain that runs on top of blockchain. You can imagine that with global supply chains, the paper that follows that supply chain around becomes huge. And if you can actually have trusted transmission of digital information about things, that solves a huge problem. They've also developed a platform called the Food Trust Platform that supports food-focused supply chains. The World Economic Forum has kind of developed a blockchain deployment toolkit, kind of giving information on what to do and how if you want to use blockchain to support supply chain. And there are multiple platforms such as Provenance. It's a platform based in the UK that enables you to provide supply chain information. So I'm going to hand over to Isabel, my colleague, to continue with the next section.
Thank you, Meryl, and good morning, everybody. I will just very briefly talk about Meryl's explained technology and fairly advanced smart technology. And I think in line with what some of the previous speakers have outlined, I just want to sort of sketch the opportunity that we are seeing for the application. and how we are going about in this pilot project. Meryl, if you can just go one back, thanks. So if we look at small scale producers, I think the one thing that comes out of research is that there's a whole number of problems, and we are very aware of what they are. But on the integrated solution side, we're definitely not there yet. And I think our main focus is then to say, how can we bring blockchain technology together in a small scale emerging environment, which obviously is a bit more challenging than a commercial environment for a number of reasons. And how can we enhance and add value? So I just very briefly want to point to some aspects when we talk about challenges in a small scale farming supply chain. And I think the drivers of the challenges has got a lot to do with the fact that it is a low volume operation to start off with. So on the input side, I think the obvious issues are then being able to have enough buying power to have cost-effective inputs. I think that's the one obvious issue. On the production side, issues are around having access to information, technology, etc., to really have optimal production from the piece of land that's being farmed. When we talk about post-harvest packaging processing, if we're thinking fruits or vegetables or things like that, access to infrastructure, and again, being able to purchase, for example, packaging materials at a good rate. Distribution and logistics, same kinds of issues. Do we have enough load consolidation to be able to have cost-effective transport? And then I think something that people often forget, if you're in cities or close to cities, there is a huge divide in the ability of our national transport systems when we're talking about peri-urban and urban systems as opposed to rural and especially deep rural systems. So that's challenging, I think, a challenge and an opportunity to pursue. Then on the retail and the export side, I think matching markets, being able to access markets if your production is limited, I think that's the first part, but then very importantly, being able to have products that are up to standards in national markets, but definitely for export markets, being able to prove where your product is coming from, being able to prove that you are maintaining cold chains, for example, food safety and all those kinds of aspects. Meryl, if you can move on to the next slide. So particularly what is if we stand back a little bit from the detail of what's happening in a supply chain, what's the opportunity for South Africa and Africa? I think food security is an increasing aspect of getting attention. We're talking about land redistribution, significant resources being made available for farming, but really taking the opportunity to make the support available to turn those resources into really productive and value-adding farms, whether that is at the household level, at the subsistence farming level, or whether that is for the export market. And then I think very importantly, there's a lot of initiatives out there that are supporting emerging farmers, and I think in this audience people would be quite aware of them. But the opportunity exists to say, how do we unlock more value by taking a farm-to-fork approach? In other words, not only have a initiative looking at production optimization, but looking at it from input, literally from farm to fork. How do we take it from input supply to market, and how do we support the entire channel? Innovations are emerging in urban and peri-urban food systems. There's a lot of peri-urban food gardens and even urban food gardens, and I think there's opportunity there to make connections. And then really saying, how do we use technology innovatively to bridge all these gaps? Meryl, next slide, please. So the Lima platform is then, I want to call it the playground on the one hand, where CSR is in the process of seeing to what extent can we use emerging technologies to understand and enhance what's happening in emerging farmer supply chains. Now, some of you may be aware of a number of initiatives that make market links, mobile applications that allow farmers to link via their mobile phone to market opportunities, etc., etc. So this platform is going to be following a phased approach to say, let's start with those kinds of initiatives to say, how do we link farmers to markets, etc., etc., but gradually building it out so that we have a view of the full supply chain and really sort of using technology to fill the gaps as we see them and as we understand them increasingly, and in an iterative manner build a platform that in the end will add value. So the next bit that I want to talk about is the whole concept of an ecosystem. Thanks, Meryl, you are on the correct slide. So in iteratively building this technology support system for emerging farmer supply chains, we're really bringing together a number of role players. And I think that's important because we're not only looking at this from a connecting farmers to market perspective, we're not only looking at it from a logistics perspective, not only looking at it from an input supplier perspective. We're saying we want to use this technology as a means of bringing role players together that can then collectively enhance the performance of emerging farmer supply chains. And there's a lot of players on this slide that looks a little bit like a rendogram. Some of them within CSR, but then also saying having development funders involved, for example, having I think there's been the presentation on precision agriculture, having experts in precision agriculture involved, financiers involved looking at alternative business models for funding emerging farmer supply chains, and gradually building up that whole system. Meryl, next slide, please. So if we talk innovation ecosystem, what are we really saying? We are talking about bringing actors together, each with their own perspective and expertise around a particular opportunity or problem that we want to unlock. And in this particular case, adding in a technology platform, which may or may not be part of an innovation ecosystem, to say around this technology platform, how are we going to develop solutions that will add value? So right at the bottom of that diagram that you see there, we've got the blockchain, which will be the technology platform that's under development at the moment. On top of that, we can add other 4IR technologies that will build on the fact that this technology platform is providing us visibility of what's happening in the supply chain. And then on top of that, a whole lot of functionality. We can talk about load consolidation, we can track food safety along the chain, we can look at trade finance, etc., etc. So there's potential for a whole host of applications. And then on top of that, we are really then, in the end, having a bird's eye view of what is happening in the emerging farmer supply chains of a particular sector, whether that is poultry or whether it is vegetables or whatever the case may be. And then through the access to that data platform, a number of role players should be able to understand and get engaged and involved with enhancing what emerging farmer supply chains are doing. Meryl, if you move to the next slide. The next slide is then just to say, ultimately, the vision of this is quite large, and it is bringing information together for people to do research on and to play with and to enhance things. We have to do this in with a very our feet on the ground and understanding that there's a level of readiness in emerging farmer supply chains, and we need to build this step by step if we want to go ahead. So at the moment, we're busy with the joint CSR project, where we're scoping and understanding and developing our proof of concept in technology. And then the next step would then be to say CSR and identify partners to build this out a little bit more and bring more aspects into it. And then finally, the last step is looking at a multi-stakeholder innovation platform. So key elements that we are addressing is to look at business models. We're looking at funding models. I think that was mentioned in one of the earlier presentations as well. Small-scale farmers are not necessarily able to fund big technology solutions, so we're looking at innovative funding models to get that done. The technology, the digital part of that is part of the system, and then ultimately we need to be supporting operations. And as we build this bigger step by step, I think we are then growing this into a platform where a number of stakeholders can be participating. And then just my last slide, Meryl, if you can just flag that one. I think this is just emphasizing our phased approach. So we're going from a very limited proof of concept where we are engaging at the moment with the farming sector to understand the issues and to have the first level technology available, and then from there on building it. So we are seeing a multi-year project, a multi-year platform, that in the end then will be more technology, but the opportunity for innovation around the technology and the information that we are generating. Thanks. That is everything.
Okay, thank you so much, Isabel and Meryl. It was a very good presentation. Unfortunately, thank you all panelists for such a comprehensive discussion on 4IR and digital economy. There have been so many insights. I think we have had, blockchain 4IR. For me, it looks like, we are really streamlining the process. And maybe the question that we need to think about is, are we not leaving anyone behind? Where are we, South Africa, in terms of 4IR and the whole blockchain? Where will we be in 5 years' time, in 10 years' time? Will we see that actually being part of our routine operations in agriculture and beyond agriculture? I've heard, I think, common across all speakers has been the talk of databases and information, large amounts of information and databases that are being formed or that need to be formed. What do we need to do as a country, as a continent, to be able to actually have the resources and the capacity to do that? So I also hope that we'll be able to have that information shared to us to say, as a country, how do we prepare or how do we strategically position ourselves in terms of resources and expertise to make sure that we'll be able to do that. Digitize biology, I think it also came across. And the question is, where can we actually start to be able to do that? So for me, I would really say thank you. It's unfortunate that we won't have comprehensive discussions around that. This session is going to end at 12 exactly. So I've left 2 minutes just to give concluding remarks, after which we'll be terminated. Thank you to our audience for taking part in this session. But maybe as we get to end this session, I would ask Isabel and Mario, either one of you, to tell us where we are and is someone going to be left behind? And maybe Dr. Rian to also tell us, what are the challenges with digitalization, if time permits. Isabel, Mario.
Okay.
Meryl, do you want to take it?
I mean, I'll quickly and then you. So I mean, with regard to this particular platform, the idea is to use, no one will ever see the blockchain. The users of the technology will be able to access the system via their phones. So definitely that's what we're thinking of. And in fact, it's focused specifically on those farmers who have traditionally been left behind. So, that is the focus of the project. Isabel, do you want to add to that?
Yeah, I think the question is extremely important because the smarter technology becomes, the entities that are able to pick it up are benefiting from that. So I think what's critical in our work is trying to counter that. As Meryl was saying, we're trying to use the technology in small scale and developing environments. That's the first part. But then importantly, thinking innovatively and creatively around funding models. And if we're talking a resource constrained environment, how do we not make resources the issue that's preventing us from having the smart technologies in those environments?
Thank you. And what I would suggest is maybe we'll do, if you can send us your responses to some of the questions, then we can add them in the different platforms. But thank you so much. Thank you, panelists. Thank you, the audience.